Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was April 8th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico. And this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. I'm super excited about today's document, and that is because it hits right at my question, my primary research question about to what extent were Joan and Violante in a co-rule approach to the monarchy. So, if you are just looking at Joan's letters alone, then you would maybe not have any clue that today's document is connected to that question because it doesn't mention Violante at all. It is from the Secret Seal Register, and it is a letter to somebody that I don't think that we've seen before in the podcast. It's a certain lawyer. So the letter starts out, it starts out with Lore at the top, but then the first full line of the letter, which I'm going to say is line 1 for numbering purposes today, starts out with Miser Gener. So that is not a mosen, right? So I think mosen is the word that's used for a knight or a noble, and miser is the word used for somebody who's in the bourgeois class. And it's clear that this is a lawyer from the information at the bottom. So we zoom down to the bottom of the letter, and we can see that we've got the fuit missa. This was sent to Janerio Rabaca Legum, it sounds like bean, Leguni, something like that. It's Legu, and then with a macron, and then doctori. So, is it oh my gosh, what is that standing for? It's basically a doctor of law. So I can't quite, at this moment, expand that abbreviation for... I just keep wanting to say legume because that's in my head and I think of beans. Oh my gosh. Anyway, it's a doctor of law. This is a lawyer, right? So this is not a mosen, it's a miser. And then we also have a couple other lines. Similis lettre. Well, that doesn't look like an L, does it? Something in the middle there, and then fuerunt, and then we've got some other people listed. A certain, I think, Rodrigo Tolsa, and then on the third line, Bonifacio, something like Fratarii. They're also doctors of law in the city of Valencia. So the very last word on this folio is Valence, and it's got an abbreviation sign at the end there, so something like Valenciam is, I think, what we would expand that to. So Joan is writing to a group of lawyers in Valencia, and where we connect in to something that Violante has been doing is in the end of line 13 and into line 14. There's a name. the very end of line 13, the abbreviation for Berenguer, and then de, and then line 14 begins Vilaragut. Berenguer de Vilaragut. So, I will say to you that if you recognize that name from an earlier episode of the podcast, you are like a star listener of this whole production, because that name came up not 1 month ago, but almost 2 months ago on February 13th. And it was in a letter. That name was in a letter that Violante wrote to the governor of Valencia. That letter on February 13th, you can go back and look at that episode. It'll be linked in the corroboration section of today's show notes. Violante instructed the governor of Valencia to apprehend Berenguer de Vilaragut and his followers. There's some kind of factional feuding going on in Valencia at this time, and Berenguer de Vilaragut is in the thick of it, probably one of the leaders, and Violante had ordered the governor of Valencia to capture, imprison, prosecute, do something about Berenguer de Vilaragut. And in fact, Violante had asked not only for the governor of Valencia to do this, but to send her the names of the people arrested. And I think maybe that was like some kind of, I'm going to, be watching for you to actually do this. Like, she wanted proof. I guess maybe she wanted more information about who the people are that are on Berenguer Villaragut's side in this particular feud. So that's the last we heard about Berenguer Vilaragut in Valencia. And really quickly, I just need to point out that Vilaragut is a pretty common name, especially in the nobility class. And so there's other Vilaraguts around. And in fact, some of them are really good friends of Violante. So we have to be careful not to get confused with the other Vilaraguts. Even though there might be some kind of relatively close familial connection, this Berenguer Vilaragut in Valencia is not a friend of the, I guess, royal representatives in Valencia. This person has been identified as a troublemaker, an enemy, a threat, and Violante on February 13th instructed the governor of Valencia, Aznardo Pardo, to apprehend that guy. All right, several weeks pass, and we get to April 8th, today. And we've got this letter that Joan is writing to these lawyers in Valencia, and it's about Berenguer de Vilaragut. Let's start talking about the content of this letter. This is another one of those letters that I just love. I love to read the letters when someone's in trouble. I don't know, it's just like super entertaining for me, because you get these phrases that are like these threatening phrases. Like, one of the most fun documents to work on in the podcast so far was when Joan let it rip against the governor of Aragon for not confiscating the property of Bernat de Fortia. And in this letter, we've got actually some reminiscent phrases. It's not as severe as what Joan had sent to Sancho Martinez, the governor of Aragon, but this is pretty severe. So I have a theory about what gave rise to this letter, but let's first talk about what's inside it. So the letter starts out with Joan saying, I know from some letters that I have And wait, hold on. No, wait. He's saying, I have sent you letters, right? You have letters from me that have made you aware of the crimes that were committed against the fisc, right? I think these are like financial crimes. And but does he use the word crimes? I don't know that he uses the word crimes. It's something that he doesn't say crimes. It's like the affairs, okay? So the business, the problems. Yeah, so the affairs de la parte nostra fisc. Yeah, so he doesn't really say crimes, but basically he's talking about how I have sent you letters and you have been dragging your feet. You've been making excuses. So delays and excuses. So there's been damage because of your delays and excuses. So the delays and excuses at the beginning of line 4. Dilaciones e excusaciones. So yeah, so basically calls out this lawyer for delays and excuses. Okay. Then, this is a cool little clause here. At the end of line 9 to line 10, he has basically said, I've given you a bunch of information now. I am letting you know directly. And then he adds this, end of line 9. Que no puixats alegar ignorancia. Ignorancia is on line 10. And that means basically so that you cannot claim ignorance. So you're not going to be able to, and there's like an implication here, anymore, right? So what has happened, I think, is there's been a little bit of a like blame game going on where this particular lawyer and the others who are being sent letters like this, they have claimed that, I just didn't know. Like maybe the governor of Valencia was charged with carrying this out, and he said, I told those lawyers to go do it. And, or maybe the Berenguer de Vilaragut has been apprehended, but the lawyers aren't carrying out the prosecution. They're like, I didn't know. I didn't know we had, to do this. And, the governor of Valencia didn't tell me about it. I just, this is news to me. And so Joan has heard that they're dragging their feet and not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so he is saying, this letter that you are reading right now makes it so that you are not going to be able to claim ignorance anymore. And then he goes on to say, you'd better believe that I am looking for you to carry out this action against Berenguer de Vilaragut, and there's going to be a fine on you, a penalty on you if you don't. And actually that came before. So he puts the penalty in line 6, at the end of line 6. And there's the number 2, Roman numeral 2 at the end of line 6. And then flor d'or, that's like a day or contraction there, florins of gold, and then the next line, d'Arago, of Aragon. So these are Aragonese florins. Now my question is, I don't think it's just 2. The mark, the letter that's above the 2, I read that as possibly a letter M, but I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that 2,000 florins is reasonable here. That seems pretty steep. Maybe it's something else. It's not an M, but it's some kind of C plus something else to say that it's 200 gold florins. Not quite sure the amount here. But I don't think it can be just 2, that does not sound severe enough to me to be an actual penalty in this situation, 2 florins. But I don't know, these are bourgeois lawyers, maybe 2 florins is a lot for them. Yeah, it's an open question in my mind, and it all hinges on what are those little marks above the number 2. And that's where the paleography comes into play. Someone who has a ton of experience with paleography would be able to answer that question right away. All right, let's go to the bottom of the letter now, where we get some additional threatening language. That's always fun to read. So the last 4 to 5 lines of the letter, well, actually the last 7 lines of the letter, are all about threats. Like, you better believe that if you don't do this, you are going to be in big trouble. And I love how Joan spells out how the lawyers are going to be in big trouble. So we've got grand péril at the end of line 7 from the bottom. Okay, line 7 from the bottom. And then counting up from the bottom, line 5, we've got this lovely phrase, als altres aspra e temerosa de escoltar. What that means is that others will hear of what happens to you with harshness and fear. So if you don't follow through on this, what's going to happen to you is going to be known, and others will be, just taken aback with how harsh it was and fearful. But that's not all. In the second line from the bottom, we have, you do this, or else I am going to be so displeased. That's actually on the third line from the bottom, desplaire. And I will then, I think it's saying, I'll serve you with great, and the last word on the line, the third line from the bottom, gran, and then second line from the bottom, terror. There we have the terror again. It's going to be a really fun letter to talk about when Joan throws out the word terror. And, that's the last word of the letter. And then, after that, you've got the usual, made in Barcelona. So, this one is a hoot, again, because Joan is mad. Now, let's just think about that for a moment. Joan and Violante, they're not getting compliance the first time they ask. Would Pere the Ceremonious have gotten compliance the first time he asked? Would Queen Sibylla de Fortia have gotten compliance the first time she asked? Those are questions I'd really like to know the answer to, and unfortunately it requires some pretty deep archival work in order to discover when they have to ask again. And that's one of the things that I'm really getting out of my method here with this season of the Historian's Notebook, that you're gonna definitely miss certain things when you can only do 1 document a day. But when you look at 1 document a day over a long period of time, you can start to discover things like this. That if you are going slow and reading every single document from every day, you're not going to be able to have the time to discover. Something else, though, about discovery and the time it takes. I have now done 6 registers of the, Joan and Violante registers. Is about 30 to 40 of them that contain documents from this year, 1387. And I've done 6 of their registers. The cost in terms of not just money, but also environmental impact, the data center cost of putting those registers through the OpenClaw pipeline is gigantic. So if you know about token use and the term tokens when talking about large language models for AI, you will understand what I'm saying when I tell you that for each image from these registers, it costs about 400,000 tokens from Claude and about 200,000 tokens from Gemini. That's for a single image in these images of these red pages in the registers, the folios. The registers themselves have average 300 images. All right, so the total number of tokens being expended here is gigantic. And I had a conversation with my dissertation advisor, Dr. Fred Gibbs, about, well, is there a way to maybe reduce the token usage? But these image files, they're about 300 kilobytes. They're not giant image files, and you're just asking the LLMs to do some pretty hard work of recognizing from an image where there is text and then sorting through the paleography. I mean, it is complex. It is a complex task that is being carried out. So basically I'll just sound like a terrible person if I spell out the amount of data center usage that this has costed. So 6 registers, I think I'm just going to stop there because I'm not quite sure how it translates to things like water use, electrical use, and so on, but it's not minor. So, there's ethical qualms about doing this, and it's important to not downplay those as you're talking about the use of AI. So I foreground what I'm going to say about the usefulness of AI with that ethical dimension. I mean, that's not even to bring up the whole kind of supporting the companies that are in this sort of arms race to get to a technology that might be very destructive to humanity. All right. So that's the ethical dimension, the disturbing part, the part that makes me feel like maybe I shouldn't have been doing this. But here's the payoff. I was able to just type in Vilaragut and search all 6 of the registers, and in a couple seconds I was able to find that in September of 1387, Violant writes to the governor of Valencia again about Berenguer de Vilaragut. So, and that's not the only search result. So there's a bunch of search results to kind of look at. So because I did a automatic automatic transcription of 6 of the registers, I've got some leads on what I can look at later on this year, including a letter of September 4th that Violant wrote to the governor of Valencia. So now what I have is something that's really helpful for my research question about to what extent were Joan and Violant co-ruling, because I've got the February 13th letter that Violant sends about this troublemaker Berenguer de Vilaragut in Valencia. And then I've got today's April 8th document that Joan is sending about the same person. And then I've got a September 4th letter that we'll talk about in September from Violant about the same person. And maybe there's some others. I haven't finished going through all the search results yet because there's a lot of Vilaraguts. So I have to kind of go through and you can't always count on the expansion of Berenguer. See, in this document, it's BNG. So that doesn't always come through as Berenguer in the automated handwritten text recognition that the large language models did. So you have to go through and look at Vilaraguts. And there's a lot of them in the search results. In fact, there's like about, 200 occasions when Vilaragut comes up across those 6 registers. Okay, so all of that is to say that the AI processing of these registers is incredibly helpful in answering these research questions in a vastly shorter amount of time. Yes, if I had gone through page by page and read these registers, I would eventually get to the point where I would find that September 4th letter. But it would have taken, these take so long to sort through, even if you're a native speaker of Catalan, even if you've studied Latin for, decades, you still have a lot of paleographical work in order to figure out what's happening in these letters. And so painstakingly going through them is a time-intensive process. And you can't just do this as your full-time job. So would I have gotten to that September letter without the AI? It's open to significant doubt. So there's the defense of just how useful this tool is for historical research. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, including the transcription of what was produced in the OpenClaw pipeline process for this particular document. Visit tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.